Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of the absolute most fascinating paradoxes in human psychology. It's that fundamental tension between being smart and being wise. Have you ever noticed how some of the most intellectually brilliant people you know can sometimes just make the worst life choices? We tend to toss the words intelligence and wisdom around interchangeably in everyday conversation, but scientifically, psychologically, they are completely different beasts. So let's dive right in. We'll look at exactly what separates the two, how they're wired differently in our brains, and why, honestly, society desperately needs both.
So, can someone be incredibly smart yet completely foolish? The short answer is absolutely, yes. Having a sky-high IQ is fantastic if you need to pass a brutal exam or, engineer a suspension bridge. But it doesn't guarantee you a good life, healthy relationships, or strong ethical leadership. Take Sir Isaac Newton, literally one of the smartest human beings in history, who famously lost an absolute fortune in a stock market bubble. Think of it like this. Intelligence is like having an incredibly powerful, high-performance engine in your car. It dictates how fast you can go. But wisdom is the GPS. It tells you where you actually should be going and how to navigate the roadblocks along the way. Without that GPS, your powerful engine might just drive you off a cliff that much faster.
And this brilliantly highlights the core difference between just knowing a bunch of facts and actually understanding life. It goes all the way back to the great Western philosopher Socrates, who famously declared, "I know that I know nothing." It's a quote that perfectly sets the tone for our discussion, because true wisdom is rooted deeply in humility. Intelligence is often about accumulating certainties, right? Mastering information. But wisdom is about accepting our human limits, tolerating ambiguity, and knowing just how much we don't know. It's the critical shift from just having an answer to pausing and questioning if it's the right answer for the greater good. To really break this down, let's look at how psychologists officially define intelligence. They describe it as a broad mental ability to reason, to learn from experience, and to solve novel problems. Back in 1944, a psychologist named David Wexler called it the global capacity of an individual to think rationally. And interestingly, researchers consistently see this thing called the positive manifold. Basically, if you're good at one type of cognitive test, say spatial reasoning, you're probably going to crush others, like memory tests too. This points to a single underlying factor, which they just call G for general intelligence. Basically, it's your brain's raw processing power.
Okay, now let's flip the coin over to wisdom. Stemming all the way back to Aristotle's concept of phronesis, or practical wisdom, this is all about deep life understanding. The Berlin wisdom paradigm describes it as an expert knowledge system about the pragmatics of life. So it's not just what you know, it's how you use it. According to researcher Monica Ardelt's really cool three-dimensional model, wisdom requires three distinct pillars. First, cognitive, having a deep understanding of life. Second, reflective, the ability to look at situations from multiple perspectives. And third, compassionate, having strong empathy and a genuine care for others. Now, it's important to note that intelligence isn't just one static trait that stays the same your whole life. Psychologist Raymond Cattell actually split it into two categories: fluid and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is your ability to solve brand new problems and spot new patterns on the fly. Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, is your accumulated mental library, your vocabulary, your facts, all your learned experiences. Understanding this split is absolutely vital because it sets up exactly how our brains change as we age. Let's look at how this plays out across a human lifespan. In childhood, we're soaking up foundational learning. Then, right around age 20 to 30, that fluid intelligence, your sheer cognitive speed and puzzle-solving ability, hits its absolute peak. But hey, if you're past 30, do not panic. As we move into middle age, our crystallized knowledge is steadily growing. And as we reach our 60s, 70s, and 80s, that is when wisdom truly matures. While our raw cognitive speed might slow down a bit, our reflective wisdom, our ability to take different perspectives, and our emotional balance often reach their highest points, provided we stay engaged and open to learning from our lives. So what is physically happening under the hood in our brains? Well, neuroscience shows us that intelligence relies heavily on the prefrontal integration theory, or PFIT. This heavily involves the analytic regions of your brain, like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex for planning and the parietal lobes for representing problems. But wisdom? Wisdom taps into an entirely different system known as the default mode network. This involves the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate. These are the regions that just light up when we introspect, when we reflect on a personal memory, or when we imagine how someone else might be feeling. So think of it like this. Intelligence is highly analytical, while wisdom is highly reflective. And this brings us to a really crucial realization. High intelligence is necessary, but not sufficient for wisdom.
This is actually the core thesis of all this research. You definitely need a baseline level of crystallized intelligence, a certain amount of knowledge and basic smarts, just to process complex life dilemmas. But once you cross that threshold, a higher IQ does not automatically grant you more wisdom. No one can be truly wise without some intelligence, sure, but there are plenty of incredibly brilliant people out there who totally lack the empathy, reflection, and values required to actually be wise.
And the proof is right there in the data. Studies consistently show that the typical correlation between IQ scores and performance-based wisdom measures is only between 0.2 and 0.4. To put that into perspective, that is a very modest overlap. It scientifically proves that while these two traits intersect, they are largely distinct constructs. Intelligence gives you the tools you need to solve a problem, absolutely, but it's wisdom that dictates whether you use those tools for your own self-interest or for the common good. So, what accounts for this gap? Mostly, it comes down to how we test for them. Standard IQ tests, like the Wechsler scales or Raven's matrices, are great at measuring processing speed, memory, and analytical reasoning. They're highly reliable, but they entirely miss things like creativity or social skills. Measuring wisdom, though, involves complex narrative tasks or self-report questionnaires about perspective-taking and compassion. And here's the catch. Self-reports suffer from what's called a modesty bias. A truly wise person knows their own flaws, right? So they might actually rate themselves lower on a wisdom scale than a foolish, arrogant person would. The fool thinks they're an absolute genius, while the sage knows they're still figuring things out. If they are so different, how do we bridge the gap? The answer is emotional intelligence. Defined by researchers Salabay and Meyer back in 1990, it's basically the ability to monitor and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of the people around you. We're talking about reading body language, understanding tone of voice, and regulating your feelings. Emotional intelligence acts as this crucial bridge. It takes that raw analytical cognitive power and acts as a filter. It filters that pure logic through your social and emotional circuits, turning a cold, calculating decision into an empathetic, wise one.
Now, you might be wondering, why does all this actually matter? Well, the real-world applications are huge. In education, it means we need to shift from just cramming facts to teaching ethical reasoning and critical thinking. In the boardroom, it's the difference between a smart leader who only looks at the data and a wise leader who reads team morale and balances the bottom line with genuine compassion. For our daily decision-making, intelligence might find the most efficient solution, but wisdom forces us to stop and consider the long-term human consequences. And in aging, wisdom acts as a vital psychological resource. It gives us the perspective we need to cope with life's inevitable losses and maintain our mental well-being.
Okay, so what if we want to cultivate intelligence? The path there is relatively straightforward. Formal schooling builds up that crystallized knowledge. Challenging puzzles, learning a new foreign language, taking up music training, those can all sharpen your fluid problem-solving skills. Even getting a good workout and enough sleep supports overall brain health. But a quick word of caution here. Beware of those incredibly popular brain training apps. Research shows that practicing those memory games usually only makes you better at that specific game. It doesn't actually translate to broad, general IQ boosts.
Cultivating wisdom, on the other hand, that is a much more indirect process. You definitely can't just memorize it from a textbook. It requires confronting the messy complexities of the real world and, crucially, reflecting on them. Wisdom grows when we actively seek out diverse life experiences, when we overcome adversity, and when we learn from mentors. Reflective practices, things like keeping a daily journal, meditating, or even just debating moral dilemmas with friends, help to temper our emotional reactivity. It's all about consistently asking yourself, what did I actually learn from this failure? And how might someone else be feeling in this exact situation right now?
As we analyze all of this, we really have to acknowledge the ethical traps surrounding both concepts. The history of IQ testing, for instance, has some dark moments where it was misused to unfairly track students or push misguided ideas about human potential. But wisdom has its own blind spots too. We have to watch out for pseudo-wisdom. That's when someone cloaks highly selfish manipulative goals in deep-sounding psychobabble. And we absolutely must avoid wisdom elitism, which is the arrogant assumption that you and you alone hold the morally right perspective. Because remember, true wisdom always requires humility.
When we place these two constructs side by side, the contrast is just incredibly clear. Intelligence leans on your working memory and processing speed in the parieto-frontal network. It peaks early in life and predicts your academic success. Wisdom, however, leans on your self-reflection and empathy in the default mode network. It grows with life experience to guide your ethical choices and your relationships. You absolutely need the engine to power you forward, but you undeniably need the GPS to make sure your journey actually means something. Which brings us to our final thought. Society often hypervalues raw intelligence. We love rewarding the fastest, the most efficient, and the most knowledgeable person in the room. But facing today's incredibly complex, human-centric challenges, that requires far more than just analytical processing. So I want to leave you with this question to reflect on. Are you using your intelligence simply to solve problems, or are you actively cultivating the wisdom to ensure you are solving the right ones? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep reflecting, keep learning, and keep growing.